Well, hey there, folks. Welcome to today's episode of the Brian Nichols Show. I am, as always, your humble host, joining you from our lovely Cardio Miracle Studios here in sunny Eastern Indiana. The Brian Nichols Show is powered by the best heart health supplement in the world, Cardio Miracle. So, you want to learn how to lower your resting heart rate, lower your blood pressure while improving your pump at the gym? Stick around. We'll talk about that later in today's episode, or simply go ahead and scan that little QR code over my shoulder, or for you audio listeners, head over to cardiomiracle.com/TBNS. You'll see a little note saying you're shopping with Brian Nichols. And today we're having a little bit different of an episode. Today I'm going to be speaking to you one-on-one, and we're tackling an idea that gets thrown around a lot, especially if you talk anything in the world of libertarian politics, culture, and morality, and that is the idea that if you don't like something, you must automatically want government to ban it. And that line of thinking is driving me crazy lately because it is missing the most basic distinction between the role of government and the role of society. Government has literally one job, and that is to protect life, liberty, and property. That's it. That's it. Literally, that's it. But society, that's where we set cultural standards, where we decide what's normal and what's out of bounds, not through laws, but through persuasion and, yes, through stigma, social stigma. And if we want to blur that line, well, we're going to start letting government play referee in cultural debates, and that opens the door to tyranny, division, and endless political warfare. So for today's episode, here's what I want to break down. First, we're going to talk about why people confuse the word dislike with banning things. Second, what government's lane actually is. Life, liberty, and property, but we'll talk about that later. Third, why stigma and persuasion are way healthier than state coercion. Fourth, Ron Paul's amazing quote, "We got to make things unthinkable," and we're going to talk about that later. Number 5, the dangers of government-enforced morality. Sixth, the marketplace of ideas versus the hammer of law. And finally, 7th, why liberty requires virtue, but not government-imposed virtue. And you know what I find fascinating? How often people jump to extremes when you simply express that you don't like something. So like I'll say, hey, I don't think that this X, whatever, is a good idea. And instantly someone's going to shoot back, oh, so you want the government to outlaw it? You want them to pass a law? As if those are the only two positions on the table, silence and apathy on one side or government banning on the other. And this happens all the time. I've had conversations where I'll critique something. Maybe it's a drag queen story hour at a public library. Maybe it's corporate America pushing garbage messaging, or maybe it's cultural nonsense. And then the response I get is, wait, Brian, I thought you were a libertarian. Why? I thought you cared about people. Why do you care what people do? And this reaction, it's missing the point. Because being libertarian doesn't mean that you don't care what happens in society. It doesn't mean you shrug off every behavior, every cultural trend, every moral choice. What it does mean is that you don't want government using its power, which is always backed by force, to impose a one-size-fits-all solution. Caring about something and wanting a law against it are two entirely different things. If my neighbor is blasting heavy rap music at 3 a.m., I don't have to run to Congress to demand a federal ban on guitars. I can walk over, I can knock on the door and say, hey, 3 a.m., not cool. Or how about if a local restaurant is serving disgusting, unhealthy food, like truly disgusting, like dangerous? I don't need to call the FDA to outlaw them. I just don't eat there. And I tell my friends, don't eat there. That's persuasion. That's social pressure. That's stigma. And that's the marketplace of ideas in action, or just the market in action. But the bigger problem is that you have this live and let live crowd that says, well, if it's not hurting you, Brian, why do you care? And that mindset is so backwards, and it only exists in a vacuum. But culture doesn't work that way. What you tolerate today becomes normalized tomorrow. And what's normalized tomorrow becomes institutionalized the next day. And by the way, once it's institutionalized, good luck trying to resist it. Resist. And then let's take public schools as an example. For decades, people have shrugged and say, hey, whatever, it's just a school assembly. It's just a curriculum tweak. It's not hurting anyone. And then you fast forward to today, and you have entire generations that are shaped by ideologies that were once goofball fringe. And now, if you push back, you're the one who's considered to be abnormal. That's how fast cultural tolerance turns into cultural domination via government force. So when people say, why do you even care? The answer is, I hope, quite simple. Because culture matters, folks. Because I want my kid growing up in a society where there are still boundaries, where we still have shared standards, and where we can say, hey, that's not okay. And we can do that without immediately running to Uncle Sam to pass a law. And the irony is that the same people who accuse you of being an authoritarian for daring to criticize something are often the very first to run to government when their own values are threatened. And they'll mock you for saying, oh, I don't like drag queen story hour, but then they're going to demand hate speech laws if someone offends them. You misgendered me. Yeah. And then they'll say, stop being judgmental, while simultaneously lobbying for federal regulations to shut down industries that they don't like. So it's not really about live and let live, is it? It's about whose preferences get state power behind them. And that's why this distinction matters. Because you could, and you should, care about what's actually happening in your community. You should be vocal about what's harmful, but also what's good. And by the way to deal with this isn't just to go ahead and ban things using the government, but rather through social stigma, through persuasion, and through voluntary standards. Because once you turn every disagreement into a legislative battle, society will fracture. Every election becomes a war, and people stop talking to each other. So no, disliking something doesn't mean I want to outlaw it. What it means is I actually care about my world, I care about my family, and I care about my community, and what we're living in going through. And caring doesn't make me authoritarian. It makes me human. And by the way, if we're going to have an honest conversation about what government should or shouldn't do, right, we have to at least first start with first principles. And the reality is that government really only has 3 core responsibilities. Literally, just 3. Protect life, protect liberty, and protect property. That's it. Life is, I hope, straightforward. Nobody has the right to harm you, to kill you, or assault you. Government's role in this is literally to simply create laws that protect against violence and punish those who cross the line. Liberty means you're free to live your life as you see fit, so long as, say it with me, you're not hurting someone and you're not taking their stuff. Government's job is to defend that freedom, not to micromanage it and not to dictate lifestyle choices. And then finally, property. And this is the foundation of a functioning society. Because if you don't own anything, well, then there's no incentive to take care of it or to improve it. So government's job in this case is to make sure your stuff is yours and nobody can just come in and take it away. Now, yes, these pillars rest on moral assumptions like killing is wrong, stealing is wrong, enslaving is wrong. I know these are earth-shattering, but notice the distinction. Government's role is to protect against those violations of those moral truths, not to regulate every choice that people make. So stopping someone from stabbing you is very different from telling you how many cheeseburgers you're allowed to eat. And here's the danger when government wanders outside of that narrow role. Because instead of protecting your rights, it starts redistributing wealth. Instead of defending your freedom, it starts micromanaging your speech or your business. Instead of keeping people safe, it starts trying to regulate lifestyle and behavior choices. Once government crosses that line, it doesn't shrink. It doesn't go back. It grows. And that's why this matters. If government stays in its lane, life, liberty, property, then all the messy moral and cultural issues fall where they belong. In society, in families, in churches, in communities. That's where persuasion, stigma, and voluntary standards shape behavior. That's where responsibility belongs, not in the hands of politicians and bureaucrats. And here's where a lot of people seem to get confused. If government isn't in the business of enforcing morality, they assume that that means anything goes. But that's not true at all. Society has its own set of tools for shaping behavior. And again, that's stigma, that's persuasion, and it's cultural norms. And honestly, those work a lot better than government laws. If the bottom fell out tomorrow, would you be ready? Not just with food and water. I'm talking about protecting your money, your family, and your freedom. And that's why you need the Expat Money Online Summit, October 10th through the 12th. My good buddy Mikkel Thorup, host of the Expat Money Show, is bringing together top experts from around the globe to show you how to legally protect your wealth, secure a second residency or citizenship, cut your tax bill, and even own property abroad. And this year's focus is Latin America, and the opportunities are massive. Argentina is moving toward free markets. El Salvador is transforming. Panama and Paraguay are offering simple residency programs. Guys, a plan B isn't optional anymore. It's essential. And the best part, the summit is 100% free. Just grab your tickets at expatmoneysummit.com. And hey, if you want a lifetime replay access and exclusive VIP panels, grab the upgrade and use promo code TBNS for 20% off your ticket. That's expatmoneysummit.com, promo code TBNS. And now, let's get back to the show. I mean, think about it. If your neighbor never mows their lawn, you don't need to go and petition the federal government to pass the National Mowing Your Lawn Weed Act. The neighborhood gives them the side eye, maybe a comment or two, and eventually, hopefully, they shape up. But that's how communities self-regulate without a single law being passed. Now, let's take bigger debates like drag queen story hours at public libraries, which, you know, I'm very vocal about. If you believe that that's inappropriate, which I do, and you should absolutely be able to speak out against that. That's not authoritarian. That's using your voice in the cultural marketplace. And if enough people agree, that practice will fade away. On the flip side, supporters can make their case too. That's persuasion. And that's how a free society works. And the key difference here is between stigma and government force. And the key difference between stigma and government force is flexibility. With stigma, people can disagree, they can push back, and even change people's minds. With government, there's no debate. Just do this or else. One is persuasion, the other is coercion. And when you skip persuasion, you don't win hearts and minds. You just create resentment and fake compliance. So the bottom line here is that social stigma and persuasion aren't enemies of liberty. They're what makes liberty possible, folks. They let society set boundaries without giving government more power. And if we stop using those tools, the vacuum's going to get filled by the state. And once that happens, every cultural disagreement turns into a legal battle and freedom starts slipping away. Now, one of the best examples of how to approach morality without running to government comes from the great one, Ron Paul. He used to say, when he was talking about abortion, that the goal is not necessarily to make abortion illegal. The goal is to make abortion unthinkable. And that's a huge distinction. And it's a principle we can apply to other cultural issues too. See, because making something illegal doesn't necessarily change hearts and minds. At best, it forces compliance, but when society decides something is wrong, when families, communities, and culture as a whole are rejecting it, then people internalize that standard. They don't avoid the behavior out of fear or punishment. They avoid it because they believe it's wrong. And that's actual lasting change. And this is why persuasion and stigma matter so much. Because when society takes ownership of moral questions, people are free to debate. They're free to challenge and even shift cultural consensus over time. That's messy. I mean, sure, it's messy, but it creates durable convictions. Government, on the other hand, it skips that process. It just writes a rule, and rules without persuasion almost always, if not certainly, will create backlash. The Ron Paul approach reminds us that the real battle isn't in Congress. It's in the culture. It's in how we raise our kids, the conversations we have in our communities, the ideas we defend in public and in private. Laws can restrain people, but only culture can transform them. And if our goal is a society that values life, liberty, and responsibility, then persuasion, not government force, is how we actually get there. And here's the part people don't think through. Whenever government gets involved in deciding morality, you're not just asking for a little guidance. You're asking for force. You're asking for men with guns who will be able to impose fines and leverage prisons to become the mechanism by which society is deciding what's right and what's wrong. And once you hand that power over to the state, it never goes away. And it rarely stays in the hands of the people that you agree with. See, morality enforced by government always sounds good when it's your morality on the winning side. If your team controls the levers of power, you might feel justified in saying, well, this is just how things should be. But politics doesn't work that way, folks. Power flips, the pendulum swings, and sooner or later, the same government you trusted to enforce your values gets hijacked by people who despise your values. Then what? Then what are you going to do? The same hammer you handed them is going to get swung right back at you. And this is why every election feels like an apocalypse. When the government's playing moral referee, the stakes are always sky high. Because it's no longer about tax policy or trade deals. It's about whether your deepest beliefs are going to be outlawed or shoved down your throat. That turns politics into a zero-sum game where compromise is impossible. Because who compromises on morality? Nobody. That's why everything feels like war. And the war doesn't just play out in Washington. It trickles down into daily life. When morality is defined by statute instead of culture, you create enemies out of your neighbors. You turn disagreements into crimes. You turn persuasion into prosecution. So instead of hashing out things in the public square, people start calling for lawyers, lawsuits, and litigation. And now think about what this does to liberty itself. If the government can decide morality, then freedom is conditional. I mean, you're free to speak as long as what you're saying there lines up with the current moral orthodoxy. Well, you're free to run a business as long as your values match the ones the bureaucrats bless. Oh, yeah, you're free to raise your kids as long as your parenting doesn't cross over whatever proverbial line the state has drawn this decade. That's not freedom, folks. That's privilege that's granted by a ruling class. Government isn't even good at this job either, by the way. Like, when it tries to legislate morality, it doesn't produce virtue. It produces compliance. People don't suddenly see the light because Congress passed a stupid law. They just learn how to check the right boxes, keep their heads down, and avoid punishment. And that's not the same thing as a healthy culture. That's fake morality. It's surface-level conformity that's enforced at gunpoint. Now compare that to what happens when morality is shaped by stigma and persuasion. If society decides something is wrong, people actually internalize it. They start to believe it. They pass that beliefs down to their kids, and they live it out in their communities. That's lasting, because that's real. And it comes without the resentment that government coercion always breeds. See, once you invite government into the morality business, it doesn't stop with the big stuff. It creeps into every little detail. Today, it's outlawing one behavior. Tomorrow, it's subsidizing another. The day after, it's mandating your speech, your diet, your hobbies. Because if government is the source of truth, the source of morality, there's no logical stopping point. Why wouldn't it regulate everything? Remember, the more divided a country is, the more dangerous this gets. In a homogenous society where everyone more or less agrees, government-enforced morality just kind of feels redundant. But in a pluralistic society like ours, where half the country fundamentally disagrees with the other half, that's just a pure recipe for chaos. Because every time your side wins, the other side feels oppressed. Yet every time your side loses, you feel attacked. See, that cycle never ends. It's by design. It's just going to escalate until people stop seeing the system as legitimate at all. Sound familiar? All right, Brian, so what's the alternative? We've already laid it out, folks. Keep government in its lane. Life, liberty, property. Let society handle the rest through persuasion, stigma, and voluntary standards. And no, that doesn't mean you don't care about morality. It means you care not to hand it over to politicians and bureaucrats who are almost certainly going to weaponize it. If you're a new parent, you already know the feeling. Running on maybe 3 hours of sleep, chasing your kid before the coffee kicks in. It's like you're constantly in survival mode. And even if you do find time to eat clean or sneak in a workout, your body's just not operating at full speed. Stress, sleepless nights, and poor nutrition tank your nitric oxide levels, leaving you sluggish, foggy, and unfortunately snapping at the people you love the most. And trust me, I've been there. That's why I started using Cardio Miracle. That's a clean nitric oxide blend that supports energy, circulation, and mood with no caffeine crashes or stimulants. Just ingredients like organic beetroot, CoQ10, and L-arginine that naturally help you stay present, productive, and powered through parenthood. Trust me, this stuff helps you show up for your family. So, scan the little QR code over my shoulder, click the link in the show notes, or simply head to cardiomiracle.com/TBNS to give it a try. And by the way, when you go to cardiomiracle.com/TBNS, you're going to get a discount automatically applied at checkout. Just look for the little note saying, "You're shopping with Brian Nichols" at the Cardio Miracle homepage. One more time, that's cardiomiracle.com/TBNS. And now, let's get back to the show. Government-enforced morality doesn't create a better society. It creates division, resentment, and ultimately tyranny. A truly free society, though, it relies on something better. A culture strong enough to uphold virtue without needing the long arm of the state. See, if government enforcing morality is the hammer, then the alternative is the marketplace of ideas. And while it's messier, for sure, it's infinitely more freer, and frankly, it's far more effective. See, the marketplace of ideas means we let arguments compete. People make their case, others push back, and over time, the best ideas win because they actually persuade people. Compare that to government, where one side grabs power and simply declares, "Do this or else." That's not persuasion, that's coercion. And coercion doesn't create conviction, just surface level compliance. And you don't need to look any further than history. Prohibition was tried to regulate and legislate sobriety. And what happened? Crime exploded, speakeasies thrived, and trust in government tanked. And if you contrast that with smoking, rates didn't drop because of bans. They dropped because society, through stigma, health campaigns, and persuasion, convinced people it wasn't worth it, that it was unhealthy. And that, folks, is the beauty of the marketplace of ideas in action. Persuasion helps adapt culture. Culture shifts, ideas evolve, and people move with it. Government laws don't adapt. They just calcify. They linger long after society has moved along because bureaucracies never like to repeal their own power, which is why they've been fighting back so much. So yeah, I get it. The marketplace of ideas is messy, Bad ideas are going to pop up. Harmful trends are sometimes going to gain traction, but at the very least, they can be debated, they can be exposed and defeated in the open court of public opinion. With government, bad ideas don't just circulate. They get codified. And once they're law for usually good. And that's why we need the marketplace, not the hammer. Persuasion lasts. Laws just punish. And if liberty is going to survive, it has to be rooted in conviction, not compliance. So now we have to answer the final critical question. Well, what makes liberty sustainable? Because if we're being honest, liberty by itself isn't enough, folks. If you give people absolute freedom but strip away responsibility, you don't get a thriving society. You're going to get chaos. You're going to get people doing whatever feels good in that moment, even when it destroys their family, their community, or themselves. And that's not liberty. That's not even anarchy. It's chaos. And the truth is that liberty requires virtue. Not government-enforced virtue, but voluntary virtue. People choosing to live in a way that respects others, that builds up their communities, that aligns with shared morals and standards. That's what keeps freedom from collapsing in on itself. Think of it like this. Liberty is a wide open field. Virtue is the fence line around the edge. And without that fence, the animals wander into the road. They destroy crops, and eventually they're going to hurt themselves. But with that fence, they've got plenty of room to roam. But they stay within the boundaries that protect them and everyone else. But the difference here is that the fence shouldn't be built by that government force. It should always be built by culture, by family, by faith, and by personal responsibility. This is why the founders talked so much about virtue. See, they didn't set up the Constitution thinking, well, as long as we've got these laws on paper, everything will work fine. No. They assumed that we'd have a moral, religious, and community-driven people who would use their freedom responsibly. And without that, the system falls apart. John Adams put it bluntly, our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. See, he wasn't exaggerating. He was pointing to this exact problem. Liberty doesn't survive without virtue. Now, let's be clear about what virtue means in this context. It doesn't mean perfection. It doesn't mean that every person is going to live by the exact same lifestyle. What it means, broadly speaking, is that society is going to uphold certain standards that encourage responsibility, they're going to discourage vice, and promote the kind of behaviors that keep communities strong. Families staying together, neighbors looking out for one another, people working hard, telling the truth, treating others with dignity and respect. Those aren't government programs. Those are cultural commitments. And here's why this matters so much in our time. Too often people think the answer to culture decay is government intervention. Families are breaking down. Let's pass this law. Oh, people are making bad choices. Let's regulate this. That's the wrong instinct. You can't legislate virtue. You can only cultivate it. And cultivation happens at the bottom. Where? In your churches, in schools, in neighborhoods, in the way parents raise their kids. If we outsource virtue to government, it's going to backfire. Instead of strong communities, you get dependency. Instead of responsibility, you get compliance. Instead of resilience, you get fragility. People stop doing the right thing because it's right, and they start doing it because they're told to. And when they're no longer told, they just stop altogether. And that right there is the death of culture. But when virtue is chosen voluntarily, it sticks. Because when communities reinforce it through praise, encouragement, and yes, even stigma when necessary, people internalize it. They believe it. They pass it on. That's how freedom survives, folks. Not by people living as they see fit, but by living responsibly. No politicians just writing another law. So what's the takeaway? Liberty without virtue is unsustainable, but virtue imposed by government is tyranny. The balance is voluntary virtue within that free society. That's where families and churches and communities have always needed to step up. And that's where we as individuals have to model better choices. That's where the real work of preserving freedom happens. Because let's face it, Washington isn't going to come and save our community. Congress isn't going to raise your kids. Bureaucrats aren't going to teach responsibility. No, that's all on us. And if we don't carry that, the vacuum will get filled by government. And once government steps in, it's not stepping out. So the challenge to today's episode is simply this. Don't just defend liberty in abstract. Live in a way that makes liberty work for the long term. Uphold virtue in your own life. Encourage it in your community. Speak up and speak loudly when something or someone threatens it. Not because you want a law passed, but because you know that liberty without virtue collapses into chaos, and you are not willing to let that happen. All right, so let's bring this home. We started today's episode by clearing up a basic critical confusion. Just because you dislike something doesn't mean you want government to ban it. And that really is the heart of this issue, understanding the difference between what belongs to the state and what belongs to society. Government's job is small but vital, protect life, liberty, and property. And nothing more, nothing less. And when it strays from that, when it starts playing moral referee, it's going to do more harm than good. And that's where society comes in. Culture has its own tools. What are they? Persuasion, stigma, and yes, cultural norms. They're not perfect, but they're far more effective than just some arbitrary top-down laws, because they're going to shape real conviction instead of surface-level compliance. Remember Ron Paul's principle that makes it plain. The goal isn't to make something simply illegal. The goal is to make it unthinkable. That's how real lasting change happens, when culture owns responsibility for virtue, not when government forces it. Because the second government takes over morality, everything becomes zero-sum wars. Your side enforces it today. The other side enforces it tomorrow. And the hammer of law crushes freedom in the process. And that's why the marketplace of ideas is infinitely better than the alternative. And yes, it's going to be messy, but it lets the strongest arguments win without coercion. And at the end of the day, liberty only survives if it's paired with virtue. But virtue has to be chosen, not imposed. It has to come from families, from churches, from communities, and from individuals stepping up, not bureaucrats handing down edicts. Liberty without virtue is going to collapse into chaos. Virtue enforced by government collapses into tyranny. But voluntary virtue in a free society, that's where flourishing happens. So, your call to action today, folks, don't outsource this to Washington. Don't wait for politicians to come in and save the day or fix your culture. It's on you. It's on us. Use your voice. Speak truth, especially when it's unpopular. Set standards in your own family, your own community, and then live in a way that shows liberty and responsibility can actually coexist. If you want to preserve freedom, don't just fight against government overreach. Fight for cultural strength, because that's the only way that this experiment in liberty doesn't just survive, but it thrives. And with that being said, we're going to go ahead and wrap things up there today, folks. Thank you for joining us. If you got some value from today's episode, you know the drill. Go ahead and give it a share. When you do, tag yours truly at B Nichols Liberty. You can find me on X, on Instagram, and on Facebook. As for the Brian Nichols Show, we have two different versions of the show. We have a video show and an audio show. If you'd like to listen to your shows on the go, like yours truly, head over to your favorite podcasting platform like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, or elsewhere, and hit that little subscribe button. And by the way, we have over 1,000 episodes of the Brian Nichols Show in the archives, so make sure you go back and check out some goodies there from yesteryear. And if you want to watch the Brian Nichols Show, head over to YouTube, Rumble, X, or Facebook. You'll go ahead and check out the entirety of the Brian Nichols Show's episodes in their video format. Just do me a favor, because we're airing these episodes every Monday, Thursday, and Friday at 9 p.m. Eastern. Hit that little subscribe button so you don't miss a single time we have a new episode drop and go live. But with that being said, folks, if you got value beyond sharing the episode, the one other thing you can really do to support the program is to support our phenomenal sponsors like the Expat Money Summit and, of course, our phenomenal studio sponsors, Cardio Miracle. One more time, scan that little QR code over my shoulder or simply head to cardiomiracle.com/TBNS. But with that being said, we're going to go ahead and put a pin in today's conversation. Brian Nichols signing off here on The Brian Nichols Show. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to The Brian Nichols Show. Find more episodes at briannicholsshow.com.